Beautiful ladies and handsome men, I am not sure what's true or false in this story. I take gossip, tea, rumor, and scandal from yesteryear, from online, from word of mouth, from books, and I ball it up and I tell you guys a story. Now, let's get to it.
What's up? What it do? And how are y'all doing, Scandalites and Says So Squad? This is Ashley with Ashley Says So. I am back with another old Hollywood scandals video, and today we're going to be talking about one of the kings of rock and roll who was also very strange and kind of sex crazed, Mr. Chuck Berry. Let's get to it. Charles Edward Anderson Berry was born on October the 18th, 1926 in St. Louis, Missouri. His mother's name was Mary Bell and his father's name was Henry Berry. On top of Charles, who we are now going to start calling Chuck, Mary and Henry also had about 4 or 5 other children. And growing up, they sometimes all gathered around to listen to the record player. His mother also played piano, so he kind of pretty much grew up around some type of music. And these experiences led Chuck to have a somewhat interest in music from a very early age. I mean, it just didn't rule his life or anything like that. But he was interested enough that at the age of 15, he did his very first performance at a school show. And when he did this performance and it went so well, this is when some of his family members around him thought that he was going to try his first attempt at breaking into the music industry. But Chuck was actually more interested into breaking into people's cash registers. And this behavior right here got him locked up at the age of 16 in the year 1944. I'll explain the details of how this happened a little later, but I will say right now that while Chuck Berry was in prison, he tried his best to obey all of the rules so he could become a model inmate. And because of this, he was afforded many privileges. And one of these privileges was boxing. And baby, that boy knew better than to try to fight them doggone folks. Gossip claims that it was one time he had to fight a man, and this man almost beat Chuck Berry to sleep. Whooped Chuck so bad that after the first round of the fight was over, this boy went and sat in the wrong corner. And then got mad when the folks was telling him to get up out that man's seat, telling him he wasn't going nowhere and folks needed to leave him alone. So boxing nearly made Chuck Berry a joke, but luckily they gave him one other privilege while he was in prison, and this was music. Chuck performed with a group for church in the prison, and they were so good at what they were doing that they ended up performing for the assistant warden's wife. And this right here made plenty of folks think that Chuck Berry was 2.0 seconds from being can't get right on the movie Life. See, the assistant warden and his wife actually lived on prison grounds. So Miss Thang was always putting in word for that prisoner Chuck to come over to her place and move her furniture around, requesting for him to come and sing solo songs for her, even asked for him to teach her dance moves. It got so bad that some of the older black inmates were actually scared for Chuck. They saw themselves as needing to try to save his life. So sometimes when that lady would request for Chuck to come to her room alone, some of the older inmates would receive the word, keep it to themselves and not tell Chuck, and instead tell Chuck to go somewhere and work in the fields or go work in the kitchen. And then when Chuck was gone, they would send word back to the lady, letting her know that, Chuck was scheduled to be doing something else today. He's not available. You think that stopped Becky May? Baby, not at all. Miss Ma'am would send somebody to go and find Chuck, whatever he was doing, and have them bring him to her. Gossip claims that one day she and Chuck were in her room and they were practicing slow dance moves, so they were actually dancing together. Baby, some of them doggone white inmates walked by and came in and started a riot, tried to kill her and Chuck Berry. And then Chuck child, they left that woman out there with the riot and then ran into her room and locked the door on that woman. And I guess that experience must have showed her that, honey, push come to shove, you ain't Chuck woman, he ain't finna save you. So all of those private dance lessons and solo furniture moving and all that nonsense ended up stopping soon after this, and Chuck was able to survive the 3 years that he did end up spending in prison. As soon as Chuck was released, he was itching to find himself a female fling, but the female fling that he ended up finding turned out to be true love, and that was with a woman named Demetta Suggs. Well, to the public, she was known as the Meta, but to Chuck, she was known as Toddy, and they ended up getting married in the year 1948. Soon after this, Chuck Berry settled into the married man lifestyle. The Meta ended up giving birth to their first child, followed by many more. But by the time 1951-1952 came around, Chuck Berry was bored with the regular life. He wanted to get back to his music. And so he started to perform at local clubs with the Johnny Johnson Trio. And then in 1955, he ended up meeting artist Muddy Waters, and the rest is just history. Chuck Berry became the nationwide man of hits with Johnny B. Goode, Maybellene, Sweet Little 16, and many, many more. But man, oh man, honey, do these gossip and rumors say that Chuck Berry had some kind of skeletons in his doggone closet. The scandal, child, the scandal. Let's get to it. Now, if you believe the rumors on the streets, Chuck Berry was a mess from the very start. Gossip claims that the boy was a doggone peeping Tom in the 4th grade. Allegedly, when he was in the 4th grade, his teenage neighbor was upstairs in her bathroom taking a bath. She either heard or saw something out of her window, and when she got up to take a closer look, all she saw was Chuck Berry's BDB head and a smile. Turns out this boy had climbed a tree in his own yard and was now hanging from a branch like a sloth, getting a bird's eye view at this girl's goodie. Well, the rest of the story says the girl went and pulled down the blinds, but she yanked too hard and the blinds, the curtains, and everything else came down and bust upside the head. Chuck's little tail ran back home laughing, but wasn't nothing funny when his daddy came in with that belt and knocked his back in. Thing is, though, there are rumors galore about Chuck's mannish tail when he was a child. He was always running around trying to see somebody's TT. And one of the times he tried this mess, he ended up in a world of hurt. Story says that Chuck, who was probably still around the 4th or 5th grade, was walking around in some woods and he was spying on a bunch of white couples who were having a picnic. And I want to make it clear that these people were not having a picnic inside of the woods. There was a picnic area and the woods surrounded the picnic area. So Chuck is just walking through, laughing, giggling, pointing. And soon he did end up seeing just what he was looking for. But this anatomy in particular had a man's hand on it. And what's worse, the man that the hand belonged to was now looking straight at Chuck. So gossip claims that Chuck tried to run away, but the man ended up telling him to get his little eager butt back there. And when Chuck comes back, the man starts asking him, "You like what you see, boy? You want my woman, boy?" To which Chuck, of course, says no, but then he starts to notice that the man and woman start whispering and talking amongst each other. Soon, the man tells Chuck to come even closer to them, and he asks the young boy if he wants to die. Chuck again says no, and this is when the man says, "Well, get on your knees, boy," and you take her feet in your hand, you start rubbing her feet. Chuck did what he was told, and then the man told him to kneel down and start kissing the woman's feet. So as we can see, this situation is quickly turning into one of assault, because as Chuck is rubbing and kissing, the man continues to palm and rub the woman's anatomy until the woman ends up calming down. After it is over, Chuck has all of these mixed feelings and emotions, of course, and then the man tells him that if he ever tells anybody, his whole family will die. But Chuck wasn't worried about telling nobody. What he was worried about was when he himself would be able to release some of the emotions and feelings that he was having with somebody. And baby, that boy started doing stuff, didn't matter if the woman was young or old. At one point, he had this big breast teacher, and Chuck would sit in class and act like he didn't know words in his book so he could raise his hand and the teacher would come over, and when she would lean over, Chuck would position his hand in a way that when the teacher raised back up, he would end up copping a feel. Now, as Chuck became a true teenager, like the age of 14, 15, things like that, those teenage girls became just as riled up as he was. The boy was said to be fine as wine. And so gossip claims when he was around 14 years old, he and his family went to church on Sunday like they always did. But on this particular Sunday, the pastor's daughter came switching up to Chuck, batting her eyes, and she asked him if he wanted to go outside around back with her. Chuck feels like this is the moment that he's always been waiting for. Baby, they get behind that doggone church. That girl started yanking at his pants, trying to rip off his shirt, trying to push him down on the ground. So child of folks say the boy got scared, ran back around the church and got on his knees and started praying. But at that church, that boy should have been doggone praying double time, honey, because that pastor's daughters were on demon time. Word on the streets is that a few weeks later, Chuck and his family came back to that church, and the pastor's other daughter, the older sister of the first girl, also came up asking Chuck if he wanted to go and take a walk with her. And that is when Chuck Berry finds out what Ushy Gushy is all about. And now that his little behind had experienced some so-called Ushy Gushy, his tail was on the lookout for it constantly. And this right here led to a night of disaster. Rumor has it that he went to a school party and there was this girl there by the name of Oma. He starts talking to Oma, and so they end up leaving and walking to his house. Chuck intends on using the basement because that is the only entrance that won't disturb the whole house. They get into that basement, the shoes come off, the clothes come off, baby, they get the party started, and the light comes on. Ain't no way! Just ain't no way you finna turn this house into a whole house. Child, them folks say that Chuck Berry daddy started beating them kids while they was still pooking, honey. Just fire! Lit they behinds up. Eventually, though, Oma ended up running out of the door. Chuck, however, had no such luck. And by the next day, child, that boy back probably looked like a road map. No matter the beatings, though, no matter the fussing, the arguing, you could not keep Chuck Berry away from no doggone girl. Luckily, though, by the time Chuck reached the age of 16, he started to mature a bit more, and he actually was alleged to have a steady girlfriend. And this girl's name was alleged to be Sarita. And per gossip, Sarita was not a very pretty girl, but she was said to have a great personality, a great attitude, and Chuck was said to have really liked her. Although some sources claim that the real reason that Chuck liked her so much is because Sarita was so agreeable. She went along with a lot of stuff, and this agreeableness had Sarita looking like Boo Boo the Fool. The story says Chuck and Sarita used to attend something called USO dances every weekend. And at these dances, Sarita used to let other girls dance with Chuck. She used to let other girls talk and laugh with Chuck. Well, all of these other girls at the dance all wanted Chuck Berry for themselves. But gossip claims that Chuck always stayed with his Sarita. One night, though, there was this new girl in the mix. Her name was Margie, and Margie was said to be a very pretty girl. And especially for back in that time, she was said to have light, bright skin, you know, these hazel green eyes, sandy hair. And not only was Margie beautiful, gossip claims that she was older than Chuck Berry. Some people even said that Margie was like 20 years old. Again, Chuck Berry is 16. So one night Margie shows up. Immediately she becomes a part of that group of girls that's all in Chuck Berry face. And she's there a couple of weekends doing the same thing all the other girls do. Well, gossip claims that one night when the dance was over, Chuck and Sarita were walking to his car, and Margie is standing outside waiting on the curb with the other girls when she yells out, "Hey Chuck, can you take us home too? You always taking Sarita home. Us girls should get a ride home too." Chuck looks at Sarita trying to see what she feels about it, and Sarita is kind of just like, you know, I mean, okay, you know what I'm saying? They can get a ride. So boom, all the girls pile up in the car, and Chuck starts taking all of these girls home every single week. One thing for certain, though, is that Sarita is the last one to get dropped off. So Chuck is never alone with any of these girls. After a few weeks of this, everybody is headed to Chuck's car after the dance, and while they are piling in, Margie starts to say, "I don't want to sit in the back seat. I want to sit in the front seat." And Chuck is like, you know, no, Sarita gonna sit in the front seat with me. To which Margie replies, "Well, I'm tired of sitting in the back seat. It squares up, it's hot. You know, I think we should really take turns riding in the front seat." Again, Chuck looks at Sarita. Sarita gives this, you know, cool, that's fine. You know, I don't mind. I'll sit in the back seat. Well, Margie gets in the front seat that night, and then every night after that. Like nobody ever takes turns. Sarita never gets back in the front seat. But again, she's cool because she is always the last one that Chuck Berry drops off. Then a few weeks after that, everybody is leaving the dance trying to get into Chuck's car, and Margie runs ahead of all the rest of the girls, jumps in Chuck's car, shuts the door, locks it, and then rolls down the window and says, "Sorry girls, it's just gonna be me and Chuck tonight. I got a surprise I want to show him." So the story says Sarita looks at Chuck, waiting for him to clear things up. Baby, this boy starts rubbing the back of his head, sitting up there looking around like he don't know what's going on. Turns out, his tail wants to see what kind of surprise Margie got. Because although Sarita has been the last one getting dropped off, The whole time Margie has been in the front seat, she has been rubbing on Chuck Berry's knees, his thighs, and that thing to sit up high. And although at first Chuck was moving her hand away, Margie had been persistent. So by now, you know what I'm saying, he had been letting that hand flow and was kind of wondering what was going to happen next. So while Sarita is waiting for an answer and Chuck is rubbing the back of his head, Margie leans over and says, "Don't you want to see the surprise I got for you, Chuck?" Baby, Chuck Berry jumped in that car, sped off, and left Sarita on the corner with them other girls, coughing and waving away the exhaust smoke, child. That boy was gone. But while he was driving off with his new girlfriend, he really should have paid attention to how smooth she was. Because just like she played Sarita, baby, she was finna get ready to play him too. Firstly, she told him, "Lay your head on my lap." Chuck lays his head down, she starts stroking his hair, and then she leans and starts to take her bloomers off. Chuck jumps up, starts trying to unbuckle his pants, and that is when Margie tells him, stop, lay your head back down. And then she tells Chuck, "Turn your head inward." He does that. Margie lifts up her dress, and then basically she tells Chuck to eat. And this is brand new to him. He is 16 in the 1940s, so he is hesitant, but eventually, you know, she tells him what to do and he does what she asks. And then we come to the kicker. During all of this passion, Margie kind of calls out, "Ooh, one day I'm gonna get a girl to do this. But right now, you're doing a great job." Chuck hears this, but he has no concept of what she's saying. So in his mind, she's just saying stuff. Anyway, she finishes and he finishes. And then when he gets up, he once again tries to unbuckle his pants. And Margie tells him, no, keep your pants on. You've proved your love for me. You've showed me just how much you love me. Now I think you need to take me home. And you know, you probably won't see me again because I got to move away. He didn't understand it at that time,
but he had just been played by a lesbian.
Sometime right after this, gossip claims that he and his two friends go out of town and then get to where they're going and get mad because their stomachs start growling and they ain't got no money to get no food. So one of them had a gun barrel, not even the whole gun, just the gun barrel, and they took that and ended up sticking up 3 stores. After they got some food and finally filled their belly, they get on the highway, put the pedal to the metal, and they are hooping and hollering, letting their hair blow in the wind like they John Dillinger or somebody. And next thing you know, they little hair was still blew back, but the wind had stopped because the little hoopty they was in had broke down. So they cruising and coasting and scared and had ended up in a ditch by the time the car had fully stopped. And they get out and they're flagging down cars. One car showed up pretty quickly and it was a little old man in the car, and he asked Chuck and his friends if they needed help. And suddenly Chuck grabs the gun and runs to the driver's side of the car, opens up the door and tells the old man to slide over. And so the old man did slide over, but he ain't stopped, child. That man opened up the passenger door and cut out. I'm talking about, they say that old man got little. Say that old man was running so fast across that doggone field, he ended up making it to a payphone. And it was his phone call that got a police roadblock set up about 30 minutes down the road, which ended up getting Chuck Berry and his friends locked up. But anyways, I've already talked to y'all about things that happened to Chuck while he was in prison. Well, once he got out of prison, when he was 19 years old, that is when he ended up meeting and marrying his wife, Demetta Sugg. But Chuck Berry was not a very loyal husband at all. In fact, after he and Toddy got married, maybe about a year later, Chuck ended up getting a janitor's job at an apartment building, and this afforded him and his wife to be able to live in that apartment building. Well, there was this white lady that lived up above Chuck and his wife, and Chuck ended up banging the night away when Toddy was right up under him in the other apartment sleep. But the folks say that one of the main women that was in his life was a lady named Francine. Now, I don't know if Francine and Chuck Berry were lovers, but gossip claims and it is alleged that they were lovers. She became his secretary, his bookkeeper. Some gossip claims that she was even a house mother for a house that Chuck Berry kept like as a harem for all of his women. Now listen, gossip claims that when Chuck Berry truly became a star and started bringing in big money, he started a housing compound called Berry Park. I imagine this as something like Paisley Park for Prince. Well, anyways, rumor has it that this is where Chuck Berry used to stash his women, and Francine used to kind of be the manager of those women. And this whole Francine managing the girls thing ties back to one of the biggest scandals of Chuck Berry's life, and that is the scandal that involved alleged 14-year-old girl Janice Escalante, the one that Chuck was accused of crossing over state lines with for the purpose of having sexual intercourse with. Her. But what people don't know is Janice Escalante was not the first one that Chuck got caught with. In 1958, Chuck Berry was allegedly traveling with an underage French girl by the name of Joan Mathis. Now, he and Joan ended up getting a flat tire, and when Chuck pulled over to change it, a police officer pulled up on them. The police saw Joan in the car, and so they decided to search Chuck's vehicle. And when they did, they found some money, and they also found a concealed weapon. This gave them reason to arrest not only Chuck, but Joan as well. And when they got there, gossip claims that the police was trying to make Joan say that Chuck Berry was trying to rape her, or maybe had future plans to rape her. And if she couldn't call rape, they wanted her to say that she and Chuck had been sexually active, but Joan would not admit to that either. Because of this, they allowed Joan and Chuck to make bail, and then the weapons charge was just dropped. Now, most people would have been thanking their lucky stars and making sure to never put themselves in this type of situation again. Not Chuck Berry. Which means when he ended up having a concert in 1959 and these two young girls walked up to him, Chuck could not help himself. One of these girls was a black girl by the name of Beatrice, and the other girl was an Apache Indian girl by the name of Janice. Now, per Chuck, the black girl Beatrice did not pique his attention at all. As a matter of fact, he said that the black girl Beatrice looked like a typical black girl. But when he saw Janice, she really got his attention. The folks say that Chuck asked Janice how old she was, and the black girl answered for both of them and said, "We're 21 years old." To which Chuck probably looked at her tail like, "I wasn't talking to you," but looked at Janice and asked her if she wanted to go on the road with him, if she wanted to be with him, and allegedly Janice says yes. Chuck and Janice traveled together for several performances. Of course, they stay in several hotels and things like that. And then he calls Francine, the so-called house mother, and he tells her, "Hey, I want you to find Janice somewhere to stay and then give her a job at my club," because Chuck Berry owned probably several clubs. Well, one night, Janice does not come to work at the club. The next day, police officers show up at Chuck Berry's show, and police show up at wherever he was, and they tell him that he's being arrested for violating the MANN Act. And that is a federal law that criminalizes anybody that takes a woman or girl across state lines for the purpose of doing prostitution, debauchery, or other immoral purposes. Well, Chuck is like, "What the heck are y'all talking about? Janice is 21 years old and she ain't no prostitute." To which the police tell him Janice is actually 14 years old, and yes, she is indeed a prostitute, and she's already told us that she's had sex with you several times. Chuck was fucked. Especially when they ended up bringing the issue of that young French girl, Joan Mathis, back into the forefront as well. All of this made Chuck Berry an absolute monster, and he ended up being sentenced to 5 years in prison. Once he got out, he went back to pursuing other women. And per the folks, Chuck was even bolder about it, honey. He was with this one woman and her husband out to eat. Chuck reaches under the table and starts to feel her leg. The woman ends up giving him kind of a half smile like, and then he takes his hand away. Well, a little later, he thought he would try again. So he puts his hand back on her leg, and he feels all kind of hair and all kind of sweaty skin. What he just felt was the woman's husband's hand. And when he looks back up, the woman's husband is looking at him like, "I see why my hand is on my wife's leg, but why is your hand trying to be on my wife's leg?" Another young lady that he had stashed at Berry Park was a 21-year-old by the name of Candy. And honey, this sure enough is a scandalous thing, child, because gossip claims that her parents flew out to meet Chuck Berry at one of his shows. After the show, said Candy's mama showed up at Chuck Berry's hotel room, came knocking at the door telling him, "I love the way you take care of our child. I need to thank you personally for for taking care of my daughter. Spreaded that thing out and laid it down on him. But y'all finna show enough trip out at this next one. Child, the folks said that little Richard was sitting up there requesting that Chuck Berry lay him down. Listen, all I know is the folks say that Chuck Berry and little Richard had a show together, and little Richard came backstage in Chuck Berry's dressing room and asked Chuck Berry straight out, "Charles, you interested in doing this or not?" Said Chuck Berry was like, "You mean doing it? Yeah, what else I'm talking about, fool? It'll be the best performance of your life." Baby said that Chuck Berry nervously laughed and tried to come up with an excuse to leave the room. And it said that little Richard told him, "Shut up!" and then got up and left out the room and said they never talked about it again. And I'm not sure if Chuck Berry's wife Toddy accepted his cheating ways or not, but all I know is that the man did what he wanted. And sometimes all this cheating led to some beating. And that was the case in 1987 when Chuck Berry was said to be dating a woman by the name of Marilyn O'Brien. Per rumors, she and Chuck had a long-term relationship, and she was either upset at him for messing around with other women even though the man had a doggone wife. But anyway, she was either upset over that or he was upset that she was leaving him. One of the two. Whatever the case, on December the 18th, 1987, they got into a full-blown argument, and she said something that Chuck didn't like, baby. He reared back and punched that woman square in her face. She ran right past the doggone cops, straight to a lawyer, and took out a $5 million lawsuit against him. And I know that we have been talking a lot about Chuck Berry's groupies or his other women, but baby, you haven't heard nothing until you hear the way that this man behaved with his alleged prostitute. And whoop, child, I promise you, after hearing this, you ain't gonna be able to do nothing but shake your doggone head. Now, in 1989, Chuck Berry owned a restaurant called Southern Air, and he had a cook there by the name of Hosanna Huck. And I don't know how Hosanna came to know this information, but somehow she found out that Chuck Berry had been recording her while she used the bathroom and while she undressed at his restaurant. Hosanna went to file a lawsuit. As soon as she did, like 50 other women came out and started to say that Chuck Berry too secretly recording them using the bathroom and undressing, both at his restaurant and at his home. So Chuck's lawyers come out and deny all these women, oh, they're crazy, oh, they're money hungry, they're jealous old lovers, until a handyman that Chuck Berry hired got nosy. That man was supposed to be working to repair something. Child, next thing you know, that man was going all through Chuck Berry stuff and ran across secret tape that showed that these women and sometimes young girls had been recorded secretly without their knowledge. And I know that Chuck Berry was embarrassed and upset because he had got caught in the wrong, but I'm sure he wishes that it all ended right here. It did not. That handyman also found videos of Chuck Berry with these alleged prostitutes. Baby, these folks say that Chuck Berry was on that doggone tape with a woman sitting in that bathtub. Say that Chuck stood up and started swinging his ding-a-ling in that woman doggone face. Told her to open up and let a stream of pee go. It was in that woman's hair, on her face. It even got in her eyeball. But y'all, how about while he was peeing, he was sitting up there asking that woman what it tasted like, and then he messed around and let her poot out and was sitting up there talking about, smell it, smell it, smell it. And I don't know if he was saying smell it like that, but per gossip, he was making this woman smell his poop. And that's not half the trifling mess. Gossip claims that there was another tape. Chuck was laying on the bed with his legs up, and this woman was eating the booty like groceries. And I guess Chuck said that he needed to put some seasoning on it, honey, because why gossip claimed that that man pooted in that woman's mouth? I'm sorry, y'all, but they did say that that man had pooted in that woman's mouth. But that's light work, baby, because the next one is just a scandalous thing, child. And that is the fabled Chuck Berry tape that is called It's Time for Breakfast. And honey, everything just stinks around here all of a sudden, just woof. Why come one of the folks say that one of the prostitutes came up to Chuck and started writing facial activities? Child say while Chuck Berry was gobbling it up, he ended up saying, yum, it's time for breakfast. Baby, the folks say that woman let a storm of brown glory come tumbling out into Chuck's mouth. Bam, baby. I'm not fooling with y'all. I'm not doing it with y'all. This is it. I am done. All of that is alleged. The gossip blog said it. Honey, listen, I don't know. Like I said, everything is stinking right now. What I do have to say is that Chuck Berry was a very wild man. He lived the rock and roll lifestyle, but his musical achievements have not been touched, in my opinion. I do know in 1984 he received the Recording Academy Lifetime Achievement Award, and he thanked his secretary Francine, and then he thanked his beautiful wife, Miss Toddy. As far as Miss Toddy, I guess she took the stance of, she can't worry or control what her husband is doing. All she could do was do what she was supposed to, and gossip claims that she raised their children beautifully. And she also remained a dutiful, constant wife to her husband until the end, which was on March the 18th, 2017. From cardiac arrest, Chuck Berry had made it all the way to the age of 90, which meant that he was one of the select few who became a legend in his own lifetime. And this is the end of the old Hollywood scandalous tale on whom some would call Mr. Rock and Roll himself, Mr. Chuck Berry. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please go ahead and click the like button. Please go ahead and subscribe. I will be back soon with more content. I love you all. Bye.